Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Assalatu wassalamu alayka ya Rasulullah wa ala alika wa ashabika ya Nur Allah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. Welcome to another edition of this Careers Insight career session where we'll be talking about routes into teaching. Today we've got Brother Faisal Rai, who will talk us through the routes into teaching. Brother Faisal started off elsewhere, but then he obviously chose teaching as a career. He will go through his route and what he did, which qualification he took. And without further ado, I will pass on to Faisal, Brother Faisal, who will talk a little bit about the career insight into teaching. But just before we start, Brother Faisal, welcome.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Do you just want to tell us a bit about yourself, where you live, are you local, have you lived in Bolton all your life?
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ashabihi wa barik wa sallim. Salatu wa salamu alayka ya Rasulullah. So so in response to your question, I'm a born and bred Boltonian. Been to school here, college here, eventually, which I'll speak to in a moment about. Went to university locally as well. Again, worked locally, so I've stayed in the north of England pretty much all my life. Briefly, I went out and worked abroad and then returned. When I was working as an accountant, then eventually after my career in finance, it led me to teaching, both at the madrasa and from a career perspective. And here we are today talking about what the title says is education is a path, not a destination. Good. So I think I was asked what the title is and why I chose that particular title. I think it's kind of something that we need to recall that, any sort of course that we do in our lives, we expect to start, finish, and then you think, yes, it's done, it's completed. But education is one of those things that never ends. Irrespective of what course you're doing, you finish, and then there's something else that you can do better, whether it's dini ta'aleem, whether it's dunyawi ta'aleem, and hence the title, it's a path, not a destination.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you're right, I think most people do choose a particular degree, but tend to sort of move on to other areas of work quite often. It's a regular occurrence, and I've known people who tend to do a particular qualification, but then change directions, and it is a common thing. And some people actually change 2-3 times in their lifetime and move into different directions, which is fine too, which is obviously you're going to talk about. And I think the last session we did with Brother Yasin, he changed directions as well. So I think it is a common theme that people should venture into and look into anyway. Bismillah, so do you want to sort of start your presentation, and then I'll jump in and ask questions as they come along?
That's fine. Yeah. As you can see on this slide, I've just done a very brief sort of overview of my journey into teaching. So initially, just before I begin, it's come kind of full circle almost, because the secondary school that I went to myself is where I'm actually teaching at right now. So I started off at Smithell School, which is in Bolton, where I studied my GCSEs. Eventually, after the end of the 5 years, I came out with 10 GCSEs, and again I stayed local. Went to the college which was next door, which in today's terms is known as Bolton Sixth Form College. There I studied for A-levels, and having passed them, I eventually went on to university. I studied at University of Salford, studying finance and accounting, Bachelor of Science degree, and eventually having completed that successfully, alhamdulillah, and having completed my Hajj afterwards, I got a job working in the finance industry, in particular in a bank, working in Manchester. I was there for a total of 8 to 9 years roughly, and during that process, sort of from 2007 I believe it was, to the end of working in the bank, in the middle I started teaching at madrasa as well. And within my roles working in the bank, there was sort of an underlying theme of training, learning and development. So I initially trained as an accountant, and then I was training other accountants and new recruits. Then I moved on to payroll accounting, and it was the same there in that I was training people. So there was a sort of underlying motivation in that sort of educational or training sort of field. And as I alluded to earlier, that eventually that led me to going out to another country. When I was working for the bank, I worked out for the bank in India for 6 months. Again, that was training. So they were setting up a branch there, and I was training and developing new recruits there to a certain level. And then eventually at the end of that project, I returned. But it was about taking the plunge really, because obviously when you're working, you've got steady income coming through, and then if you're going back to university or doing a course, then pretty much your income is going from wherever it is to zero again, and you need to be able to do that. So I decided to take the plunge, and went back to university, and I did a PGC, so the Postgraduate Certificate of Education. From then on, I've done a few teaching jobs, having completed my PGC, both at colleges and teaching in HE, higher education as well. And then now I'm working at a secondary school, and obviously in the background I've been teaching in a madrasa locally at Masjid Moinul Islam as well, which I've been doing for the past 4 years. And in totality I've been working originally at Masjid Islam for about 10 years.
Good, good. Just to remind the viewers, if they've got questions, they could use the YouTube chat or WhatsApp at any point, and we'll ask the questions to Brother Faisal. So you took a different direction now. I think some people will wonder, is there a preference? Do you miss going back to your original job, or do you prefer teaching?
Thing is, as I mentioned, that I've always had a sort of underlying motivation of a training, learning and development, so that naturally led me to the field of teaching and education in general. I could see that I was making a difference to people's development over a period of time, whether it's a short course, whether it's developing them from an accounting perspective, and eventually leading them onto their sort of own journey in their careers. Obviously with madrasa as well, I could see that I was making a difference, alhamdulillah, to the children from their dini ta'aleem perspective, and I felt that it was coming to me naturally almost. So whilst my forte was in the finance industry, I felt as though my motivation and forte, if you like, was in the teaching side of things. So again, a piece of advice that I would give to prospective people who are maybe thinking about going into the teaching field or not, I think what you need to remember is, if you feel as though you can make a difference in that field, you don't have to almost pull yourself out of bed in the morning, then that's going to come naturally to you. That's something that eventually gave me the kick to take that plunge and go through with it eventually.
And just going back to your qualification, you got a degree. Now going on to do your PGCE, was that quite easy step to take? Was it?
So there's a few sort of routes that you can take. I'm just gonna. I can't go into it. But there's a few routes you can take. They're predominantly and most sort of well-known and easiest sort of way of getting into it is either doing the Bachelor's of Education, where you're literally doing a degree in education, where you will be going to schools, colleges, whatever it might be, and doing that course and you concentrating 100% on education. The route obviously I took was I did a degree in finance and accounting, so I've got that there in the background. So I think that works quite well in the sense that if at any point you decide that teaching's maybe not for you, you've got something else to fall back on. Whereas if you've just done a bachelor's in education, that's your area, that's your forte, and in order to go into another field, then you'd have to almost start again if you want to study a degree. So I did that, obviously the degree in finance and accounting, but then going into the PGC was quite easy in the sense that the field that the particular specialism was mathematics, and that is a bit of a sort of shortage area in this country. So they're crying out for teachers in that area. So it was quite easy to get into that field really, and there's demand for it. So
did you do your PGC part-time or full-time?
Again, yes, you've got the option of doing it part-time or full-time. I personally did it full-time because I quit my initial job in finance, so I wanted to get it done as quick as possible in one academic year. But if you've got other commitments, if you've got maybe children or something along those lines, then you can do that over a part-time period, and that would usually take 2 academic years. Sometimes you can fast-track it even though you're on part-time and do it quicker if you can get your placements of experience in. I did it full time and it worked quite well. And with that, what you need to remember is that a PGC, whilst it seems like it's a course similar to university, it's very, very demanding. I think that's something that people tend to underestimate, those who haven't been in that particular field. Historically, there was a lot of paperwork, a lot of files. Obviously now everything all that is out of the window because everything's online, but nevertheless there is a lot of paperwork. So a lot of people just have this misconception almost that let's go into teaching now that my particular career has not worked, and that's not the case at all. Take it from me, I've done it pretty recently, and it's very demanding, and you can't afford to fall behind basically.
You're right. And also you have to do placements, so you have to do certain hours part of your PGC course, is that right?
That's right. So depending on which PGC or which course you end up going on, there'll be different sort of amount of hours of teaching that you need to complete in order to qualify as a teacher really. And with that in mind, you have usually 2 placements, one in 2 different establishments, to get a different feel for different areas, different sort of target learners, different target audience, and different almost quality of students, because you might go to a certain area which is per se affluent, and you'll get a different sort of caliber of children there. You might go to another area which has students that come from maybe sort of less or disadvantaged background, so you'll get a different caliber of kids. So it's getting a good feel for the whole profession and testing yourselves at different levels. Yeah,
excellent. Yeah, good. And I think just to clarify that as well to the public, so you have to get a degree to go into teaching. You have to get have a degree, and then either do a PGCE or part-time PGCE. But it is quite demanding. Degree can be demanding, but PGCE is also quite demanding. If you're doing it part-time, obviously you're either working, and so you're working during the daytime, and then attending college or university to complete your PGCE maybe once or twice in the evening. And I think people do forget that it can be quite demanding, but it's not off-putting. It's worthwhile once you get the qualification. And like I said in my previous presentations, that once you get a qualification, you've got it for life, and nobody can take that away from you. So, but it's like anything else, anything's challenging. Once you've got it, then you've got it for life. So yeah, you've got 2 options: either doing it full time, 1 year, or 2-year part-time degree. Finance, in terms of PGC, do you have to apply for student finance or not?
So I've got a few questions that I'll answer as I'm going along. But in terms of financial support, I'll go on to that a bit later. But there are avenues where you can get bursaries. But we'll look at that in more depth in maybe the Q&A section later on.
Okay. Yeah. So you're working at Smithfield, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, secondary.
Yeah. That's right, secondary
Do
school.
you teach a particular year group, is it?
I teach all year groups, so year 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11. Previously I've worked in a college where I was teaching sort of resit students and A-level students, and I taught very briefly some sort of degree level students as well when I was working at Blackburn College and University. So it's quite demanding, quite different as well. So I think you need to be clear sort of which direction you want to go in, because in terms of the PGC itself as well, there are different versions of it in that there are ones which are geared towards primary, there are ones that are geared towards secondary, and some are geared towards the FE, so the 14 to 18 sort of year groups. So and again, those will involve different sorts of hours that you need to complete for experience, and a different number of placements and associated workloads.
Yeah.
So
a lot of people I talk to tell me that teaching is really easy. You get only some holidays off, Easter holidays off, you May some holidays. Is that correct? Is it a 9 to 5 job?
I mean, I've got this slide here that says, you know, why the change. So my life as a teacher, and we'll just go on to that really, what you mentioned there about a job being easy. It does give a lot of flexibility in that usually, or if I compare it to my job previously, I was working sort of pretty much 8 or 9 to 5 sort of job, but then there was long hours involved, especially when there's deadlines and stuff. So I was pretty much at work from 8 in the morning till 6-7 p.m. and then you come home and then you're absolutely shattered and then you're just going to sleep really. So it gives an element of flexibility in that, yes, you finish a bit earlier in the day compared to other traditional jobs, office jobs, but at the same time you do bring a lot of your work home as well, so you've got to do a lot of preparation for subsequent lessons or lesson plans and other associated maybe extracurricular activities or anything of that sort. You need to put that time in at home, but I guess it's better in the sense that you can maybe spend a bit more time at home and do that with your family being beside you. But in terms of holidays, yes, it's one of the incentives. You do get more holidays compared to a traditional office job. However, the work that you put in after coming home from school, it kind of compensates for that, if you like. So a lot of people again say it's easy, like you alluded to, but it's how you look at it really. There's a lot of responsibility. You're looking after not one person and yourself doing that job, you're looking after classes of 10, 15, 20, maximum 30 people. That is a very, very big responsibility, and if you're up to that task, then eventually you'll find it easy. Yes, initially there's a lot of hurdles to get through, but once you establish yourself as a teacher, you'll have your bank of resources, and which means it will save you time in the long run, in that you've got resources there, so you don't have to plan lessons from start to finish every time, because you've got a bank of resources there with you. But eventually life will become slightly easier, but initially there's it's hard, but I certainly wouldn't say it's easy. I mean, one of the things that will keep you going is that every day is different. You'll never come across 2 days which are exactly the same. In fact, if you're teaching the same class, the same thing twice, it will go in a completely different direction. So there's no sort of same old sort of routine that you're going to be stuck to. It will always be different. The only routine you will get is the fact that a lesson starts at a certain time and it finishes at a certain time. Everything within the lesson will be completely different, and that, I guess that's one thing that keeps you going, the fun element of it as well.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Just to add to that, so the reason I asked that question is because I know that you're taking your work home, you're doing a lot of marking at home. And weekends as well, so you're preparing your lessons for that next week ahead. So you're committing a lot of time during term time, and then during holidays, obviously you're getting that perk as well. So it sort of balances out in that way. So just talking about the classroom, because you talked about the challenges in a classroom as well. Standing in front of a class of 30, 40 kids, initially, did you find that quite difficult, doing yourself or standing in front of a group and doing a presentation on a regular basis? And does it get easier?
Historically, when I was working in finance, I'd done similar things in that I trained people up. I trained young people up, I trained older people up, I trained mature people, new recruits from university. So I'd had that sort of experience, and whilst I wouldn't say I had the confidence to stand up before people, it just, once I got into the groove of it, it was quite natural. So I think it's a skill that not everyone has, but certainly everyone can develop even if it doesn't come naturally. The first few lessons, when you stand up in front of a class, will be very daunting. There's no two ways about it. But your PGC prepares you for that. They will get you to stand up and present in front of the other PGC cohort that you're studying with, and that will prepare you in the long run. I guess it's daunting, but in the it will eventually come naturally to you, and the kids will eventually see that as well, and they will benefit from you having that sort of rapport with them. I think having a good lesson or having a good relationship with the students will go very far in terms of the teaching learning process, or at least increasing the teaching learning process.
Yeah, very good. And just talking about your kids, because I mean, I've worked in registers as well, and I've always said that the teaching part is probably not as difficult as managing your classroom. And I think once you can manage your classroom, manage those 30 kids in the classroom, it's a little bit easier because you're in control of your classroom. And like you said earlier, if you can build a rapport with the kids, then it becomes a lot easier. Do you have any sort of advice for people in terms of managing 30, 40 people in the classroom?
So I'd say the PGC itself, as I said earlier, it prepares you for this, and it gives you sort of you could almost call it that the PGC allows you to make those mistakes initially in order to prepare yourself for the future. I mean, the whole point of us trying to teach and get that teaching learning process going is that there are 30 kids in a classroom. All of them have different needs. Some of them like to get their hands dirty and get in there, make mistakes and learn like that. Some of them will love the teacher just lecturing and them taking notes. Others, like to maybe play games and learn and stuff. So it's whether you can cater for all their needs really, and that will go. It will take you leaps and bounds in order to try and get to that sort of teaching and learning process. And the key to that, I think, is realizing that every child is different. They come from a different background, and a lot of them will have various sort of barriers to learning, and it's your job as the teacher to reduce those barriers of learning as much as possible. Some people might have a language barrier. Some people might have an age barrier. So, because when I was on my PGC, there was a mature student who was in her 60s, and she was studying for a PGC because it's just something that she always wanted to do. But she wasn't savvy with IT, and therefore she felt as though that was a barrier to learning. She couldn't learn. So in the same way, there might be children that come from maybe a disadvantaged background, and they don't have the IT available, so therefore they're not going to be as savvy with IT. So it's your job to try and reduce that as much as you can in order to get that learning and teaching process going. And similarly, there'll be kids with disabilities, some with SEN, which obviously you're in a better position to speak about that. But once you realize and your learner, at school we have something called the learner passport, where everything about that particular student is put on a passport as such, and the teacher is aware. So I have children in certain classes which have SEN, and because of that they cannot access certain work. But if you give them a fidget toy, for example, it helps them to relax and release their anxiety, and that way they can concentrate more. So it's knowing your learner and reducing the barriers of learning, and that will in turn get them on your side. Once you've got them on your side, then it doesn't particularly matter if you've got one, or if you've got 30, or if you've got more people, alhamdulillah, and inshallah that will come with time. And of course, experience is a massive thing. It does help when you're in a position of power as well, because if you think about it this way, a newly qualified teacher may struggle to get a class to concentrate, but if you see the head teacher walking through the door, then suddenly everyone will be quiet like that. So the position of power, or a person who's in a position of power, who may be able to take away certain privileges, for example, that always helps.
Just a couple of questions that have come through.
Yeah.
In terms of your marking, when you're doing your marking scheme, do sort of some of the kids challenge the grades, or some of the parents challenge the grades that you've allocated to the kids? So is there a lot of that, or is there not a lot of that?
You'll find a lot of the students don't even take any notice of a lot of the time. They won't even notice the fact that you've marked a book. Some will. It all depends on individually. In fact, some parents, like you said, might actually challenge it. But what we need to remember is that every school, every department, they have consistencies in their marking. Every teacher needs to be marking to that particular protocol, and that way you're going to be consistent across the board, and you're not marking for the sake of marking. You're marking because you know that there's a target for that child to try and attain. Yes, they're doing well, but if they're doing well and they've attained everything that you can do, maybe there's steps that you can give in order for them to excel even further. You don't want to hit sort of a glass ceiling where they can only learn up to a certain level. There's always more that they can learn, so challenging them that extra bit. But you'll always find people that parents that challenge, but in fact I see that as a positive, because you can tell that those particular parents are taking an active sort of approach to their children's learning, which maybe which you'd hope other parents do, but unfortunately not always. It's not always the case.
Okay, just a couple of more questions. What's the most challenging aspects of teaching?
I would say the patience element of it, really. I mean, historically, when like I said, it is the school that I originally went to, is the school that I'm teaching at right now. So when we went to that school, for example, when a teacher came into the room, we had to all stand up out of respect. And when the teacher or the head of year or the vice principal, whoever it might be, when they tell us to sit down, then we sit down, and we're in extreme silence. Mm-hmm. Those, unfortunately, those days have gone, and that's not really the case now. So having patience is obviously a virtue, but it will take you a lot further compared to a person who's not patient, because you might find that you go in, you've planned an awesome lesson, perfect lesson, but as soon as you go in, something or another comes in the way and you can't deliver that lesson. I mean, I remember my very, very, very first observation. I planned it to a T. It was absolutely perfect. I could see it. I could visualize how my lesson is going to go. As soon as I went in, the computers were down. And then I had to go back to the traditional method of teaching. But you have to have patience, and then you have to have that flexibility as well to think on your feet. Okay, I've not got the technology behind me. What am I going to do now? So having a strong subject knowledge is very important as well, because a lot of people, they just feel as though, we can just wing it and you can try it, but that's not the case. You need to have that flexibility, but then you need to have confidence in yourself by backing it up with the subject knowledge, and that will always take you towards where you need to be.
You're absolutely right, because people assume that you walk into a classroom and start teaching, but every day there's an issue, there's a problem. There might be some kids who are squabbling, and it takes you 10 minutes just to sort that out. So you go in prepared. This is what I'm going to deliver, but sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes you end up dealing with issues in the classroom, technology is not working, and then you have to quickly think on your feet, just so that the kids aren't feeling that pressure. You just got to carry on delivering. So that's part of the challenge as well. What about your relationship with other colleagues in the school? Is that challenging sometimes or not?
Again, it depends from department to department, really, because sometimes you get schools which have a open relationship with the other colleagues, in that all departments come to a central hub, so you get to meet other departments and other people. You can share practices, share best practice that way. Some like to stay in their own bubble, so you'll have maths in a certain bubble, you'll have English and science in a certain bubble, and so on. So you might be secluded from other departments, and that will be hard in terms of building bridges and building networking building a networking skills. So I think one of the good things when you have an open sort of relationship with all the other members of staffs and colleagues is that you share best practice really. So even though there's a polar difference between the subjects itself, so doing art, for example, compared to doing mathematics is completely different subjects in an academic way, but sharing practices amongst yourself will make a massive difference. I mean, there's certain children which I might particularly struggle with because of behavior in a maths classroom. So what I might want to do is go and see how they're doing in maybe English or art or PE, for example, and see how they are dealing with that particular subject. They might be completely fine, and then you can liaise with the teacher and say, okay, why is he or she completely fine in your class, but yet there's problems in my class, and vice versa. And that is very important part of kind of, again, I keep on saying that phrase, removing the barriers to learning, but there may be something which is triggering that child, which you can maybe help get rid of. For example, I know some children might just hate a particular subject. For example, it's a kind of unwritten rule almost, if you like, that a lot of people tend to hate maths. For me, it's a passion, but for a lot of people hate maths, but they find it, it's really hard unnecessarily. So if you remove some of them qualms, then naturally you might get more engagement of the children, and then you can proceed with your lessons.
Yeah, you're right, because I think sometimes you learn from your other colleagues as well, because when you're doing observations and you go into other classrooms, you learn how to deal with that particular child or a couple of children that you might struggle with, but other teachers are dealing with that particular issue. Can we just talk about online learning, because we've been in lockdown a couple of times, and that's been quite challenging as well. Face-to-face teaching is one thing, and you can't beat face-to-face teaching because you can see children's expressions. How's online learning been for you?
Initially it was quite challenging because it's new. It's new for everyone, not just me, for every teacher, for everyone in schools really, and taking it further from that for the children themselves, learning from a home environment, not being able to interact with their friends, not be able to interact with their teachers and stuff. That's a new concept for them, and I think that's why when I said one of the qualities that you need to have as a teacher is to be flexible and adaptable in any situation. Yes, this came about pretty suddenly, and we had to go work from home. It was challenging initially because do you know the children are there on the other side of the screen or not? Are they engaging? Are they listening? Eventually you can tell who's there, who's not, who's engaging, or whether they're actually online and got their headphones on and watching another video, for example. It's very hard initially, but what you need to do is remember that you're there for a reason. Whether it's one student on the other side or whether it's 30 students, your job is to teach that particular lesson, whatever topic or unit of work it might be, and that eventually will get them on board. And whether, like I said, whether it's one or two or whether it's a full class, I think it kind of comes from above us as well. So if there's sort of leadership are pushing children, students and parents and getting on top of them to have their children on the other side or to engage, then that also helps. I mean, what we need to remember is, again, every child is different. They might not have the capability. For example, if they are from a disadvantaged background, I mean, the school that I attend, from a national average of 30% of it's called a pupil premium, what we have there is more closer to 50-60%. So there's more of a percentage of kids that come from a sort of disadvantaged background. Some of them might be international new arrivals, and with them they're not going to have the hardware available to them. Say if there's 3 or 4 children, they only have one laptop and they all need to be on the same lesson at the same time. What do you do? So I think everyone's been quite adaptable and flexible, or they've had to be, whether they are or not, but eventually you get the hang of it. But it's just can't beat the face-to-face interaction of a teacher, really. And this week gone is the first week that I've been back in school, and I can already tell them the massive difference that it's made. But one thing that I have tended to notice with online teaching is some children that are maybe reserved in class and they don't interact from a face-to-face perspective. At home, because they've got a screen in the way, they interact a lot more and they engage a lot more. And that again goes back to their sort of the type of person they are. If they're an avoidant sort of person, then they might not want to engage, keep their head down in a face-to-face format. So, you know, the teacher maybe doesn't pick them to answer a question, but because there's a screen in the way, they're a lot more engaging and they're a lot more willing to participate. And with that, I feel sorry almost for those children, because they were doing well from the online perspective, but now that we're back into school, it's almost kind of taking a step back for them. But again, it's our job to know the learner, and then it's our job to be able to reduce that anxiety on their part in order to increase the sort of learning process.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Faisal, you also teach in madrasa, yeah, that's right. How do you take your experience of working in a school into madrasa and vice versa? Does it help, or does it sort of help sort of with each other, you know, madrasa and school?
In one word, it complements. So before, I'd like to think that I was a good teacher at madrasa, but then once I studied the PGC, it opened up a lot more avenues in terms of madrasa education. It made a massive difference in that I saw kids in a different light, and with that I could apply those particular sort of credentials to my madrasa classroom. Now, you know, alhamdulillah, in our masajid, wherever they might be, we have esteemed ulama kiram who've, you know, who are seasoned professionals in their particular areas, in their forte, their huffaz, their, you know, muftiyan kiram, and etc. But a lot of them have not undergone teacher training, so they might be a good hafiz or a good mufti or a good, you know, alim, but they've not been taught how to teach, so they can't apply certain elements which they maybe would have liked to, not because they don't know how to, but it's just that they've not undergone that training. And the fact that I went through the PGC training, it actually opened up my sort of you know, light of how to look at kids and how to you know, get the best out of them, because a lot of kids they don't get as much out of madrasa as they maybe should, or maybe they could. And it's down to the teachers not being able to unlock that potential from them, really. So it's like, I was talking to a friend recently, and you know, I was saying that when I was younger, I had this passion of riding a motorbike, and eventually, you know, I did my test, and you know, I passed in riding a motorbike. And funnily, what that actually did was it made me a better driver. So although I was riding a motorbike, it made me a better driver. I mean, how so? When I was driving a car, I was looking around for cyclists a lot more. I was looking around for pedestrians a lot more. I was looking around for other motorcyclists. It made me a lot more self-aware. In the same way, having done the PGC and getting those particular units of courses that we do in the PGC, it opened up avenues in that the students, I see them in a different light. If there's a SEN, for example, something as simple as a child who has Erlen syndrome, they may not be able to read the Quran. You get a different coloured overlay, and suddenly they can see much more clearly, and hence when you're teaching something along the lines of tajweed, they can put the A and B and C together in order to construct the sentences, which they wouldn't be able to do. And I wouldn't have known anything about that sort of element if I hadn't done the PGC.
Good, yeah. I think you've touched on it quite well there, because young people are probably a lot more challenging nowadays, and whether they're in madrasa or school or outside, and to get the best out of young people, I think if you get to know the kids in your classroom, whether it's in school or madrasa, I think sometimes you get a lot more out of the kids as well. The other question I was going to ask really is, people who are now watching and thinking about going into teaching, and quite ambitious, what are progression routes from being a teacher? What can they go on to do if they want to sort of move up the ladder?
Yeah, so there's plenty of routes really. You can initially, I would advise staying at your level and your expertise to try and bed that in and create a good foundation. Leading on from that, you know, I'm in a maths department, so the natural next step would be to go and become a second in department. What would help initially would be to maybe mentor someone. Every year there's people going through PGCEs and they need to have placements. For those placements they need schools, so they come into schools as trainee teachers, as we did once upon a time, and it would be good to mentor those individuals when they come in. That would be a good step to start. Then there would be sort of a second in department, maybe a deputy head of that department, then a heads of departments. You have other areas that you can go into, like the pastoral side of things. You've got TLRs, you've got an area of extra responsibility on top of what you're doing in your particular department, and heads of year, and eventually there's plenty of progression similar to what you would expect in a sort of office role, where you become a sort of a deputy manager, a manager, vice presidents and presidents and that sort of thing, specifically to a sort of finance field. But there's plenty of areas of progression. And moving away from school for a moment, if you've done your PGC and you're still interested in the learning development, you can go back to a sort of office job but stay in a learning development sort of role, and excel in that sort of area. So it doesn't have to be limited to just the school itself, but you've got that to fall back onto. I know when I was working as a trainer, when I was working in the bank, the person that I was working on, the head trainer, he initially was a teacher, and he had been a teacher for about 20 years, and he just needed a change. So then he stayed in the field of training, but he just went into a different sort of branch of it, if you like. So yeah.
Good, yeah. Just think that there's a couple of questions, There's a couple of questions here. What makes an outstanding, I know you touched on some of this already, but what makes an outstanding lesson teacher? What would make, in your opinion, what would make a really good teacher?
A teacher. So I've got a slide here that talks about the qualities of a teacher. I think we've talked about patience already. Just to reiterate and emphasize, I've put on more patience, because that is something that you need in abundance in teaching. Resilience, and you need to be engaging. I mean, I remember when I was at school and at university, there was a couple of teachers that were just very two-dimensional, very mundane, and you'd literally be fighting to stay awake within the first 5 minutes of a lesson. So you need to be able to be, engaging, and that kind of falls into place with the point below as well, where it says you have to have a sense of humor. At the end of the day, you have to have a relationship with your students, with your learners. If you don't have that, and it's very sort of, you're the student, I'm the teacher, and there's a brick wall in between, you're not going to have that rapport with the students, and therefore the learning process is not going to come as easily as it probably should have done. But I think sympathy and empathy is very, very important. It's almost, I would say, underestimated. Maybe if we can just maybe talk a couple of minutes about, you might know better than me, but attachment theory is something which, so if you think about a child, within the first few weeks of them being born, they don't have a sort of attachment with anyone as such, because they're still becoming sort of self-aware. Between the after the first month to the 6 month sort of age of a child, they tend to see their father or mother or guardian as their first primary bond. Once they hit 7 months plus, they go to sort of usually one particular parent or one guardian, which they have a stronger bond. Not to say that they don't have a bond with the other parent, but they have a stronger bond. But after that sort of 1 year, they begin to become a lot more self-aware, and they build relationships with other people or bonds. Could be a grandparent, could be an uncle or an auntie or a sibling. But what if a child doesn't have that initial bond at that age? And this is the reality of it. There's a lot of children out there that just don't have it. And Bolton in particular is one of those towns which is used as international new arrivals, especially for refugees. So the refugees might have completely disjointed upbringings, not have any parents. They may have lost their parents in war, famine, anything of that sort. And then if they don't have that bond, and they don't have that sort of initial upbringing and closeness, then it's going to mold them into a different sort of person. So for example, when you have a child, when they begin to crawl, they crawl a few steps and then they turn back and they always look for their parent to know that they're there. Once they see that they're there, then they've got a bit of peace of mind, and then maybe they walk a few more steps and then they turn around again to make sure that they're there or they're not. Once they're happy, then they'll move a bit further and push that boundary. If the child doesn't have that bond, it will mold them into a sort of different person, and that will eventually be quite apparent when they come into a classroom format. So for example, if a child has had a bond with a parent or a guardian where they were in tune with their emotions, then you will see that that child is very sort of forthcoming, will build that relationship with the teacher. If the parenting was such where they almost rejected them, then that child will become avoiding, or it's called avoidant. So they will avoid any closeness. So if a teacher is trying to help the student, they will always have that distance between themselves and the teacher. Then if the child's needs were there, the parent was there, but they ignored the child, again, that child will have other sort of qualities that they bring to the table. So having that sympathy and empathy and being able to realize what a child is going through, you know, will determine how your lesson goes and how you have built that relationship. I mean, a child might not have food on the table at home, and then they come into a lesson, so they've got bigger problems at home. They come into a lesson and then you shout at them because they've not brought their ruler into school. What's more important here, them not having eaten anything at home, or the fact that, you know, you've got protocol that obviously you need to follow it as a teacher, but you're shouting at them because they've not got a pen or a pencil or a ruler, but they've had bigger problems in the background. So being able to know your learner and having that sympathy, maybe relaxing the rules as touch and allowing something, but maintaining that boundary as well at the same time is very, very important. So going back to your question in one or two words, sympathy and empathy, which is under-recognized, I would believe, is very, very important quality of a teacher.
I think you've touched on it quite well there, because you've got to know individually all your kids pretty quickly, because like you said, they all come from different backgrounds. Some have parental support, some don't, some have financial issues at home. That sort of interprets how they react and behave in the classroom. And once you get to know your kids, obviously then you're not treating them differently, but you are taking into account when you're talking to them why somebody's messing around a bit more and why somebody's a bit more sleepy, or sometimes by the way they dress as well. You can tell that, you know, they've not had much time to get ready that morning, and there's a reason behind everything that happens. And rather than just shout and tell them off, if you get to know the child, then you can have a little bit of a conversation and try and sort of get them to change differently, which maybe they don't have that role model at home. Do you think teachers are role models?
Definitely. I mean, a lot of them, even though they might have parents or guardians at home, I mean, we all know we're in an age of social media, so a lot of parents, unfortunately, when they can't deal with a child, they will just hand them a phone. So there you go, that'll keep them busy. But then that phone eventually kind of becomes second nature to that child, and that eventually becomes sort of it's like almost a parent, the phone, and the child can't, you know, detach from it. So what I would say is that there's a fine line. There's a fine line that you need to achieve between that and knowing your learner, and eventually you will kind of bridge the gap almost, and being able to bridge that gap will help you, you know, move on to that sort of next level almost.
Do you have? I know you teach maths, but do you have any additional responsibilities like enrichment, or do you get to do other things with the kids? Or in school as part of your additional responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, all teachers are usually encouraged to sort of get involved in those sort of areas. They don't. They may not have a certain sort of responsibility as such, but then when there's different things like, you know, there's a sports day coming up, then they'll want to get the teachers involved. But I would always encourage any teacher or any prospective teacher that you would try and get involved in any sort of extracurricular activities, because what it does for your teaching is actually quite impressive, in that the students see you as, oh, he's my teacher or she's my teacher and I'm the student. But when you go out of the classroom format and you are a normal human being, they see you, okay, this person's all right. You know, if you're on a field and you're kicking a ball, you know, playing football at lunchtime or break time or something like that, they say, oh, this guy's all right, he's not too bad. And then they bring that into the classroom, and you'll naturally get that rapport with the children. And then once you've got that engagement, you've got them exactly where you want them. So you can pull them in if you need to, or you can keep them at a distance if you need to. But if there's that rigidness between yourself and the students, there'll always be that sort of divide. So there isn't a mandatory, I would say, expectation to get involved with extracurricular activities, but it's definitely good for the children's development, but also for your development. And it will, as weird as it might sound, it improves your own teaching practice in the long run. So it's definitely something that I would actively encourage people or prospective students to get involved with, prospective teachers to get involved.
Just talking about, so you've moved directions from banking, finance to teaching. Would you go back? Are you keeping in touch with qualifications? Are you updating your qualifications just in case, or do you think this is it?
So as you alluded to earlier on, that once you've got a qualification, whatever it might be, it's there. No one can take that away from you. I started off as an accountant, and I don't know whether I should say fortunately or unfortunately, I'm still involved in the field. You know, I also work with Bolton Council of Mosques. I do the accounts for them. So I've still got my sort of finger in a couple of pies there, in the sense that I'm still in the accounting field. And then I'm teaching at the madrasa as well, and then obviously teaching at school as well. So it's there, it's always there in the background. So if at any point you need to change or you feel as though maybe I need a bit of time out, you've got something to fall back on, which goes back to what I said initially, the routes into teaching. I wouldn't advise against doing a Bachelor of Education, but if you do a specialism in another area, you've always got that to fall back on. So for example, if you studied optometry, you're not and you're an optician, but then you want to go into teaching, then you've got your optometry to fall back on at any point in time. But that's not to say that you shouldn't do a bachelor's in education, but personally, this is my personal opinion, then I would say that make sure you have a specialism that you can maybe fall back on, just in case you want to leave the teaching field and then go into something else.
And you don't just teach maths, you teach other subjects as well, is that?
Yeah, so at the moment I'm predominantly a maths teacher, but then I teach business studies and economics and accounting too. So when I was at in my PGC, I was teaching mathematics, but then I was also doing I was covering business studies as well. So I had that element of it, and it keeps your sort of subject knowledge there as well, and keeping it up to date. And that's one of the other things that I would advise prospective teachers. So whichever field you're in, you need to make sure that your subject knowledge is relevant, especially if, so I'm just going to use it business as an example. So if you've been teaching a certain syllabus for a number of period of time, then obviously things change. So if we're studying business studies, for example, other things have happened. The finance has taken a tumble because of the COVID situation that we're in, and hence if you keep your subject knowledge up to date, then you can make that relevant to your teaching, and it kind of makes it obvious to the kids that you know what you're talking about, but at the same time they can relate to whatever is being taught in the lessons to real life. Because a lot of one of the most common questions I get from the students is, sir, when am I going to need the use of the area of a triangle in my life? What's that going to be any use to me? I don't need to know it. But I'm like, then I say to them, okay, what area or what career do you want to go into? Or I want to become a builder, I want to become an architect. There you go, you're going to need it. How do you know how tall a building is going to be? How if you're going to be laying a carpet and you don't know how to work out area, you're going to be falling short in terms of cutting a carpet, or maybe so you need something, but you need to make it relevant to real life so they can create that link, and then naturally you're going to get the kids to be more engaged.
Yeah. And you're right, I find that quite often, because you're delivering a lesson and people ask lots of different questions, and you diversify into other areas, and you try and pull it all back into the lesson, but you get very interesting questions from kids anyway. So teaching, just to summarise, what advantages, how would you tell the public, the people, if you're going into teaching, what are the advantages and are there any disadvantages? I don't know.
As any sort of career or any sort of field you want to go into, there's always going to be pros and cons. And going back to my sort of slides of why I became a teacher, I would say there's definitely more pros than there are cons. There's going to be cons with every sort of or any sort of field that you want to go into, but predominantly I would say somewhere where you have a lot of motivation and job satisfaction will make a massive difference. I know in the finance field, when I was working there, alhamdulillah, it was a good salary, but at the same time, I wasn't getting peace of mind. I didn't have peace of mind. And as you get older, when you're younger, you're like, what career shall I go into? What field shall I go into? Well, how much does this pay? How much does that pay? That's your sort of initial sort of thought. But as you get older, you realize that there's more important things in life, and peace of mind is one of them. And the peace of mind that I didn't get in the finance field, alhamdulillah, I do get from the education field. I can have a good night's sleep peacefully, and I wake up in the morning knowing that's fine, I can go to school completely fine. Whereas before, I was maybe dragging myself out of bed, saying, oh no, not another day. So it has its own merits, and I would say it depends on the sort of motivation that you've got into why you want to go into the teaching fields. If you're going just predominantly for money, then you probably will be disappointed, and not because you're not going to get the money that you want, but more because you're not concentrating on the other elements of it. So it depends on the individual as well. Some people like to just do their 9 to 5 and come home and they've got nothing to bring home, and that way they can concentrate on their family. Other people don't mind a bit of flexibility, so they finish a bit earlier, but they bring in some work home along with them. So it depends entirely on what your sort of preferences and almost requirements are.
Okay, good. That's most of the questions I had, and I think the questions that have come through from there. Is there anything?
Yeah, so I've got a few slides. Yeah. So I've just got a few slides which sort of showing questions which sort of might be on people's minds, or the sort of general questions that I would maybe assume that people might have in mind. So question 1 we've got here: do you need a GCSE, a grade C or the equivalent, or a 4 in maths, English and science if you want to be a teacher of sort of RE, for example? Do you or do you not? Well, the answer is false, because you do need a grade C or the equivalent, a 4 in maths or English, but only primary teachers are required to have a C in science. So again, it depends on which specialism you want to go down the route of. And something I've probably not mentioned that I probably should mention here is, depending on the specialism that you want to go into. So I'm obviously in maths. If you've not got a degree or an A-level that's related to that particular specialism, then you may need to do a top-up course. So for example, if you've not done an A-level in maths, I did, which meant I could just go straight into my into my PGC, sorry. If I didn't have that, then I would have had to have done a top-up sort of course in maths, usually a 6-month course, sometimes a 1-year course, depending on which university you want to study the PGC in, and that essentially proves that you know your subject knowledge, because the last thing you want is a maths teacher but he doesn't know his subject knowledge. So yeah, that's something that you might want to bear in mind. Another question: you need a degree to be a primary school teacher? True. The vast majority of degrees teachers need a degree, but there are some exceptions. So for example, if you've worked voluntary in a place of education and they see your credentials and you've not got a degree or a PGC, they might still take you on. But that's unlikely if you're applying to new sort of places. And again, just to add there, that sometimes PGC courses are quite busy, in that a lot of the quantity of people coming through the doors is quite high. So they're going to be sifting through the applicants to see which ones are worth taking on or not. So it might be worthwhile doing a bit of voluntary work in a local school. You can, as long as your DBS checked and passed, your schools I'm sure will be more than willing to let you come in as a voluntary teacher, even if it is for a few weeks. It gives you a flavour, because if some people are unsure whether teaching's for them or not, they might want to actually do a bit of voluntary work in a school, whether it's primary, secondary, and then it will give you an understanding of, yeah, this is definitely what I want to go into, or no, it's definitely not me, especially when you're at the pre-degree stage and you're unsure about which sort of career you want to go into. So having that bit of voluntary experience is invaluable, and it might actually stand you in better stead compared to other applicants as well. So that's that question. Question 3, you can do an apprenticeship to become a teacher. Is that true or false? So this is just addressing some misconceptions if you might have them. So the most academic route, at the moment the academic route is the only option. You can't just do an apprenticeship and then become a fully fledged teacher, unless of course it's specific to a certain school, which they might tell you, we want you to go onto this particular apprenticeship and hence then become a teacher. So for example, if you're teaching in the further education field, and you maybe want to teach carpentry, for example, or bricklaying or something along those lines, they might tell you, yes, we want you to go on this particular course, apprenticeship, and once you can prove your credentials, then you can bring that to the table and we'll be willing to take you on. But as a general rule of thumb, no. Question 4, you can complete a degree in teaching which doesn't include a specific subject. So true. Again, it depends on which area you're going to and which PGC you decide to choose. If you're going for the more sort of traditional ones, they usually come with a QTS, which is qualified teacher status, and they will be a subject specialism. But the ones that are FE, so further education, they don't have a subject specialism. So this is the one that I particularly did myself. We had a lot of different people. We had people that were doing psychology, some people childcare, some people English and maths, and some people business studies. So you don't have to necessarily have a specific subject. That PGC will enable you to teach in the FE environment, which is college level, doing any subject. So in theory, I could go and teach economics and business studies and then teach maths as well at the same time. But obviously you've got to show your credentials, and they will do their own sort of vetting checks to ensure that you know what you're doing before they obviously let you loose in the classroom, so to speak. So yeah, that's that question. Then we move on to question 5. You must complete a teaching qualification in order to be a teacher. Again, that's false. So contrary to belief, it doesn't always have to be a formal teaching qualification. It can be just on the basis of what we mentioned earlier on. You could just do a bit of voluntary work, and the school's happy with you, they want to take you on. Overall, I would say you do need a PGC or at least a Bachelor of Education in order to become a teacher. Could you be paid to train as a teacher? I think this is one of the questions that Shabib had. So can you be paid? Well, I've just got a little extract there, which you'll be able to see on the bottom of the slide. It's taken directly from Get Into Teaching. That's quite a good website to go into if you're thinking about going into teaching. It's called Get Into Teaching. You can just Google it, go onto it. You'll find this particular slide. It shows the bursaries and scholarships that are available. Now, if you want to go into these, which are chemistry, computing, maths, physics, languages, biology, all these are shortage subjects in the country. So there's a shortage of those teachers in this country in that specialism. So as an incentive, the government is telling you, there you go, you can train to be a teacher and you can get £24,000. Obviously, if it is in that particular specialism. There's certain criteria that you need to fulfill. Obviously, it's not as easy as, yes, I want to, I've not got a job, what should I do? Let's become a teacher and get 24 grand for free. It's not quite that, which a lot of people might fall into the sort of trap of believing. But there's that can be the difference between you deciding going into teaching or not, especially if you're making a change of career from one particular field, and then you have to cut off your finance because you're quitting that job and then going into teaching. This could be the sort of bridge in between yourself and going into teaching. So that's always very sort of important to consider, because at the end of the day, what are we doing, or what are we expecting at the end of the day? We're expecting remuneration for what we are doing as our daily job. That's what's going to put food on the table. So yeah, there's bursaries and scholarships, but before you do choose any course or any particular university, I would definitely advise getting information from the university itself if they are following that particular scheme of bursary and scholarship. And usually there's a certain limit that they can offer as well, so I would always inquire about that. There's nothing worse than going through the whole process beginning and then realizing that, oh, there's no bursaries left or no scholarships available. But generally speaking, if it's these specialisms that you want to go into, you will pretty much unofficially, I would say that you will definitely get these. Maybe not so much the scholarship as 100%, but the bursaries definitely, as long as you meet the criteria, the attendance that you need to have, the amount of teaching that you're doing as experience, and completing all the work that's expected of you, including the assignments and so on.
Faisal, sorry, just a question relating to qualifications. Is it QTS and QTLS at the same par as PGCE?
That's right. So legally, they are both on par. So if any institution where you may apply, say they require QTS and you have the QTLS, QTLS just stands for Qualified Teacher Learning and Skills. If they say that we require the QTS and you have the QTLS, they cannot discriminate on that basis and say that no, we're not going to take you because you don't have a QTS, you don't have a QTS, you only have a QTLS. They are on par legally. That's been recognized a number of years ago. So the only difference between the two is that QTS is specifically that you get with the GCSE when PGCE, sorry, when you study for secondary educational training. When you're doing FE or HE and you do the PGC of that element, you will get, or you will apply then for a QTLS, and hence then you will be on par. And what the good thing about the QTLS is that once you've attained it and gained that status, you can teach anything from year 7, which is start of secondary, all the way up to degree level, which you maybe can't do with QTS because that's just really limited initially to secondary schools. But a lot of schools or colleges will tend to have a sort of flexible approach, especially if it's an area where there is a shortage of those teachers. So, for example, if you're applying for a maths role at a certain place and they require QTS and you don't have it, you have QTLS, they will be completely fine and say, yeah, especially because it's a shortage area. Got another question, another slide, sorry. Teachers don't have to do any work during the school holidays. I think this is kind of goes back to what originally was discussed, that teachers have, a humongous amount of holidays. We may do on the face of it, but there's a lot of work that is done in the background. Marking is a lot, it takes up a lot of your time. Now, I'll just give you a flavour of what I'm playing around with. I have 7-8 sort of classes that I take care of. In those classes there's between 20 to 30 students, so there's 20 to 30 books per class that I'm marking. So that's well over 150 odd sort of books that I'm marking, and you need to keep on top of it, and then obviously you've got to plan. And then again, another misconception we tend to have is that, let's say you're teaching a class which is set 1, you'd expect all the children to be on a certain level. Yes, they are of higher caliber, those children, as in the level that they're at. However, even within that set 1, there will be mixed ability. Some people will get things quicker, some people will be different learners. So it's very important to realize that even though you're planning for a certain class, there will be various different challenges in that class that you need to account for, and that falls into play when you're planning lessons, which a lot of people probably don't tend to comprehend fully. They just think, yes, they've got 6 weeks of holiday, and lo and behold, they just sat there with their feet up for 6 weeks. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And as it says on the slide, your teacher may have laughed when they read that statement, and I would have laughed if I read that statement as well, because it's again one of those misconceptions that people have, but it's a lot of work that goes on in the background. I mean, a lot of the time we have parents' evenings that we need to attend, even in the evenings, which I think Sharif is going to just touch upon, which I'll let him, I'm not going to steal his thunder there. I'll let him speak about that. So
yeah, I was just going to say that as well. So apart from your marking and apart from your work related stuff, you're asked to stay behind to do your departmental meetings once a week. You've got your CPD training once a week as well. Sometimes you're staying behind till 5, 6 o'clock. And then you've got, if you're teaching each year group, you've got your parents' evening twice a year. At the moment I know they're online, but nevertheless you still have to attend, whether it's online or in person. You know, so there is a lot of, you know, at least once or twice a week you're staying behind, so you're not finished at 3 o'clock when the kids have gone home. There's a lot of other stuff that goes on throughout the week as well, so you know.
Definitely. There's a lot of work. It's not just doing your 5 or 6 lessons a day and then you're out of the door as soon as it hits 3:15 or 3:30. There's a lot more work involved, which people may not really realise that's happening in the background, and one of those is parents' evening. And parents' evening, there's a lot of preparation that needs to go into parents' evening before. It's not literally you speak to the parents and say, yes, your child's really good, he's attended every lesson and I've got no problems with him. There's a lot of data that teachers need to complete as well. What they've been doing, how engaging are they, is there any problems, for example right now, have they been attending the live lessons or not, have they been setting the offline work that's been set to them, and what is the caliber of it, if there's any misconceptions, have we as a teacher addressed those and give them any further work. So there's a lot involved there. So parents' evening, we need a lot of preparation before we actually can begin that conversation. But then on the flip side of it, we need the parents to be fully sort of aware of what's going on and help in their sort of from their perspective as well. I mean, I went to a speech a few years ago, and an Islamic speech, and it kind of hit the nail on the head, where there was an analogy given in that the speaker said, if I give a blank canvas along with some paintbrushes and you know, some paint to the parents, and then don't say anything, what are the parents going to do with it? Some parents might say, well, I'm not a painter, what good is this to me? So they might just put it aside and leave it, or maybe chuck it in the bin even. Another parent might say, well, this person's given me a gift, so it's not right to chuck it away, so they might just try and do something. Someone else might be a perfect painter and think, oh wow, and then they'll start painting. So then if we take a step back and then just think that that blank canvas is that child, you know, the paint that you actually and the paintbrushes is the parental side of things that you're pushing your children to do. So what you need to realize is, if you're the parent who doesn't know how to paint, no one's born with parental skills. We have to develop them as we become parents, and it's very important to build that into our nurturing skills when with our children in the background. Because again, going back to what the speaker said, is that if you leave the blank canvas somewhere, someone else will come along and pick up that canvas and start painting on it. So that is your child that we're talking about, really. So it's like that old age saying that, you know, someone's garbage or rubbish is someone else's treasure. So if you don't nurture and bring up that child in the way that you know you should be doing, as the responsibility is being given you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then someone else will. It could be another friend who's into bad stuff, it could be someone else on the street, it could be social media, it could be anything else for that child. So the parent needs to make sure that they're fulfilling their end of the bargain in order to make sure that the child's learning, whether it is dini ta'aleem or whether it's dunyavi ta'aleem.
Okay. Just to add to that, really, because I think it's probably a good time when people are thinking about going into teaching, it's probably a good time of year to start making their applications. So whether you're an adult student, adult individual who are looking to change careers, or whether you are a college leaver, probably a good time now to start thinking about applications to universities. PGCs are also done by colleges, although it's a degree, but it's run by colleges as well, so you can either do it in a college through a university, it's accredited through a university. So it's probably a good time to be, if people are thinking, start applying now. And like you said earlier, you know, age is not a barrier. Like I think you mentioned, there was a 60-year-old who's going into teaching as well, so there's no barrier in terms of teaching, so it's probably a good time. Also with teaching, you can do part-time teaching as well. You know, if people have commitments at home, kids and stuff, and you've got a couple of days, you can become a teacher and just teach 2 or 3 days, and that's fine. And I know a lot of teachers who do part-time teaching as well. So there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of scope, and for teaching, if people are thinking about it. I've got one more question. Being a Muslim, do you have issues in the classroom? Do kids in the classroom make any comments, make any suggestions, or do you have any issues with some of the boys or girls in the classroom? And how do you deal with it if you do?
Yeah, so alhamdulillah, the school that I go to, there's no such problems, and I guess one of the reasons which made the transition very easy was the fact that a lot of the children that I teach at school, I've also taught at madrasa as well. So I've already got that sort of rapport with them, that relationship with them, and they've earned my trust and I've earned their trust as well. So we've got that sort of behaviour issue and element already sorted before we enter the classroom. So alhamdulillah, that helps quite a lot. And a lot of the children that are there, the students, I know their parents personally because I might have grown up with them, and because I'm from the locality, I know the parents from that sort of area as well. So that's the sort of added bonus, if you like. So you know the children won't be pushing the boundaries because I know their parents on a personal level, and you know I might see them at the masjid or something along those lines, and I might just want to have a quiet word about their children, saying I've got this issue. So they know that they're not going to be pushing that boundaries. But we're in an age, as I mentioned earlier, that when I went to school we had to stand up when a teacher came in out of respect. Unfortunately, you know, it should be like that, but unfortunately we're not at a stage where it is like that. So you'll find the odd sort of issue in terms of behaviour from a student perspective, but from a Islam perspective, what works well is, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the fact that you know, I teach at madrasa as well, we can give them the sort of dini ta'lim as well, even if it is in the sort of school sort of setting, and we can bring the deen into it and give them an understanding that, you know, or this is not what I would expect as a good Muslim, you know, you shouldn't really be doing this, or something along those lines. And they will always take a step back and realise. You will get the odd one who will carry on regardless, but you know, I guess you get that everywhere really. So if you're working in an office shop, you might get an annoying co-worker that's always pushing the boundaries. But I would definitely go for if you're applying for any particular position in a certain area, I would research that school, research that area. Don't just go blindly into applying or going into a job without knowing the sort of local area. I mean, I worked in a school in Garstang for a period of time, and it was a school of roughly about 700 children. I went in and I was the only non-white face in there, and initially I felt intimidated, but you know, alhamdulillah, they were very, very accommodating, even though they had probably never seen a beard in you know, live in person themselves, you know. But you know, it's how you conduct yourself really, and that will determine how you get along with your colleagues and the people above you, and obviously the students as well. But doing research in the school will allow you to determine whether it's the right choice for you to make. You know, alhamdulillah, where I'm working, we've got wuzu facilities, we can pray namaz at lunch times and that sort of thing as well, especially in Ramadan. A lot of kids come and you know, in fact we've had some kids that were very, very clever on an academic level, and they decided not to go to private schools, and they came and they chose the school that I go to because of the fact that they've got wuzu and namaz facilities. So alhamdulillah, you'll get the parents that are driving those qualities into the children as well. So doing a lot of research before you apply in any certain area will make a massive sort of difference, and it does help if you know someone in that particular area or that school. Have a word with them informally, and that will give you a good flavour of what to sort of expect.
MashaAllah, yeah. And to sort of finish off, final question is, what gives you the greatest satisfaction of being a teacher?
I think it's making a difference, and that's, I kind of alluded to it earlier on, where despite working in finance for 8, 9, 10 years, I always had that sort of underlying quality of training people and seeing a difference that I made, and to those people. Obviously they were mature and adults, but then it gave me a sense of sort of satisfaction, knowing that, you know, I've helped to nurture this person, be it an adult. But then and that led me into going into madrasa and teaching there, and alhamdulillah, so that, you know, I can make a difference from a dini perspective as well. So that helped me, and that sort of motivation really helped. And then taking that to a school format, obviously I can nurture those who I may not see at a madrasa, so they're non-Muslims as well, because at the end of the day, a lot of the children, they just come to school for the sake of coming to school because again, going back to their home lives, it might not be as, you know, flowery and hunky-dory as everyone else. So school is a get out for them. So for them, almost it's like seeing friends, or going out of the house is a getaway clause for them. So to them, it might not be about the teaching element. It might be just about the life element for them, because they don't experience that from a home perspective. But then you being able to see that from a teacher's perspective and helping them or nurturing them, going back to what you said earlier on, do they see you as a role model? A lot of children will do, because if they don't have that role model at home, they're looking for those role models elsewhere. And if you can be that role model for them, if you keep in that sort of a brick wall in front of you because you're the teacher and they're the students, then you won't get that relationship. But if you can realize and you know your learner, then you will be able to realize that, and you will be able to help and nurture them, and you know, inshallah, make them a better person, as well as educating them at the same time. Because education is not just about getting your maths GCSE or English GCSE, it is molding them into a person in readiness for going out there in the big wide world. And I think that's what's sort of underestimated nowadays, because you're giving them a good, you know, you might get 10 GCSEs at the end of the day, but if you have no social skills or no life skills, how are you going to apply them in the real world? So it's being able to make that difference to those individuals that they probably wouldn't have done on any other day, which is the primary sort of motivation that keeps me going.
Yeah, well, good answer to that. But I think from a school's perspective, obviously they're always looking for targets, and I guess the satisfaction is if your class have done really well at the end of the year and attain good GCSE, then that is a satisfaction as well, that you've done what your intention was to achieve the qualifications that they deserve in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, you will always get what you deserve in the end. So your role as a teacher, yes, is to get the academic qualifications that they require. So it's not good just molding them into a beautiful person, but then failing every GCSE going, because you've got to achieve a good balance between the two, and having academic sort of excellence as well at the same time is very important, whether it's from a school perspective, whether it's for a dini perspective. So, you know, I mean, I was just a few weeks ago, I was speaking to my missus, and I was saying that a student that I'd taught at madrasa in his infancy went on and became a hafiz, and recently, unfortunately, my grandmother passed away, and we were doing a khatam, and that student or ex-student of mine led the initial qiraat and everything, and it was a very sort of heartwarming thing for me, because it's thinking that this is quite important to me, but at the same time, this child that I initially, in his sort of tender years, I nurtured him, and then you've just got that satisfaction in your heart, thinking that alhamdulillah, you know, they are going places. But from an academic perspective, you know that there's a lot of children who maybe will be failing because they just don't have the academic sort of know-how, but you can maybe unlock the key to them getting just about scraping a pass, and it means it will make life easier for them. Because a lot of people, you know, a lot of children come in, I'm not good at this, I'm not going to pass. But if you build up that rapport with them, maybe you can get those passes out of them, which they probably wouldn't have done elsewhere, and it will make life easier for them in the long run. Because, for example, maths, the specialism that I'm in, if you fail and you go on to college, you will have to resit your maths anyway. So it's almost like you've done 5 years of maths, you failed it, and then you're having to redo it anyway. So if within that 5 years you can unlock that potential of that child, and even if it might be scraping them through and getting that grade, it will make life a lot easier for them in the long run.
And when you do your parents' evening, I guess people or parents are making comparisons between one child and the other child, and how well the other child is doing and my child's not doing this. Is that a common theme as well, you find?
It's human nature to compare that, oh, what didn't such and such a child do? Did he get an A? Did he get a whatever it might be? So, but my response to the parents is that every child is different, and the way you are parenting your child is different as well. So let's just say that both two kids are on the same sort of par of academic excellence. they might have completely different home lives, and that will mold them into a different person. And hence one might be doing slightly better, one might be doing slightly less. And a lot of non-Muslims, generally speaking, I would say, once they've come back from school, that's their schooling day done. Whereas the Muslim children would generally go to madrasa, so they've got extra commitment from a dini perspective. And let's say they are studying a hifz course or alim course, then they will have even more. So and it's up to the parents to help, obviously, the children balance that element of it. But what I always have to reiterate to the parents is that you cannot compare the child to another child, because they are going through a different set of circumstances and environments, and that will determine them and nurture, and sort of the nurture-nature sort of a bit debate. It will mold them into a different person. So whilst they might be in a certain set, in a certain class, to compare directly would be unfair, really.
Okay, it's a question, I'm going to read it because it's quite a long question. It's from Brother Muhammad. My partner holds a PGC and wants to get into teaching, but finds it very difficult to find institutions who will take her without experience. She wants to complete her QTLS, but needs to get the hours. What's the best advice? So it's like a catch-22, you know, got the PGC but can't get the hours in. Is it because it's become a popular occupation? People find it difficult, or
I know there's quite a big government drive to try and get more people into the teaching arena, especially in the shortage subjects, which is why they're offering that incentive of the bursary and the scholarships. But in that particular case, I would advise the brother that the primary stage is what I would do is maybe try and get some voluntary experience under their belt, and that will hopefully offer a bit more opportunity, so you can sell yourself better to prospective employers. And the other element I would say is register with a lot of supply agencies. That will make a massive difference, because whenever there's work, even though it's just cover work or supply work, even if it's a day or two here and there, that will open up avenues which you wouldn't if you don't do it, basically. So, and obviously it's keeping the income stream coming in as well. You can, if you've got commitments at home, for example, you've got a child and you can't do a full 5-day week academically, you can just register with supply agencies and say, okay, I can only work Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, and they will look for you for work just for those particular days. So registering with those agencies is a primary thing. But if there's a particular institution that you would like to work for, I would definitely get in contact with them formally and say, I would like to come in and do some voluntary work. I'm not saying doing a year's worth of voluntary work. Once you go in, it will give you a flavour of what to expect in that particular institution, but at the same time, you are showcasing your credentials to that school as well, saying, you know what, this person, they didn't have to come in and they've done it on their, off their own back. And you know what, they're a good teacher, and it might open up opportunities for you. So I would definitely look in your locality and just say, can I come in maybe an hour or two? You don't have to go in for a full day as well, just can I come in for an hour or two, maybe observe some teachers, maybe act as a teaching assistant, a TA, and help around the class, and that will put the sort of positives in that school's mind, thinking that this person's actually, you know, actively helping, and essentially you're helping yourself, really. So that will inshallah open up a bit more, a few more avenues for you.
Jazakallah, yeah, that was a good answer there, Faisal. But Brother Faisal, I think that's all the questions I had. Have you got anything else to have you got any more slides that have you done all your slides there?
All the slides are done. It was just the last slide was just you know, can you train to become a teacher while working on the job in a school? That's probably one question that people might have in their mind. So yes, you can. So usually people do the SCIT, which is the school centered, or sometimes known as the ITT, the initial teacher training. But you don't have to just do your PGC and there you go, you're straight in. You need to obviously do your 2 placements, and that will involve you going into school. More often than not, you're not going to be getting paid for it, unless of course you're getting a bursary, which means you're getting paid for it. But some schools, if they see in the first few weeks that you're a very good teacher and they could do with you, they might actually say, you know what, we're going to pay you, right? I wouldn't bank on it though, but because you know, obviously they've got their own finances and stuff to deal with. But you can definitely train to become a teacher whilst working on the job in a school. but it's usually done hand in hand with a PGC and on those sort of elements.
Okay, Jazakallah for coming, Brother Faisal. That was a really useful insight into a career into teaching and the particular change in directions from going into one occupation to the other. I think people do go into teaching because it tends to be a safe environment, because you know most of the time people will get jobs in teaching, and I guess you know once people are in teaching they can teach till they're 60, 65. And I think there's a good pension involved with teaching as well. So thank you and Jazakallah for that. And I'm going to ask Akil Bhai to just do a dua to finish off. Please.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم إنا نسألك العفو والعافية والمعافاة الدائمة في الدين والدنيا والآخرة سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك صلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه ونور عرشه محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم